Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're doing a bit of an investigative autopsy on something that's baffled economists and, honestly, enraged everyday citizens for decades. We're looking at why massive public works projects almost always seem to drain taxpayer wallets, acting like absolute financial black holes. We are decoding the megaproject mystery.
Right off the bat, I want you to wrap your head around the sheer scale of this jump scare of a number. $14.8 billion. I mean, that is a staggering figure, and that's exactly what hapless taxpayers ultimately ended up paying for Boston's infamous Central Artery and Tunnel project. You probably know it as the Big Dig. And the wildest part? When this whole thing was first pitched back in the early 1980s, the price tag was supposed to be a mere $2.2 billion.
So we really have to ask ourselves, how on earth does a single piece of infrastructure hemorrhage that much money? I mean, how does a 7.5-mile stretch of highway balloon in cost by over $12 billion? Trying to answer that actually turns our explainer into a bit of a detective story. We're tracking down missing billions, uncovering structural flaws, and really looking at the psychology of ambition.
Okay, moving into Section 1, the Megaproject Paradox.
First off, we need to understand what we're dealing with here. Megaprojects are these vast, sprawling construction schemes. We're talking multi-billion-dollar dams, breathtaking suspension bridges, massive high-speed railways, and incredibly complex underground urban highways. They're definitely designed to capture our imagination, and they always promise massive economic boosts. But researchers have pointed out a glaring paradox. Even though we're building more of these than ever before, they actually perform remarkably poorly in reality. And the data from Aalborg University illustrates this perfectly. Based on Bent Flevenberg's damning research across 258 transportation projects in 20 different countries, projects worth $90 million, by the way, the findings are honestly terrifying for anyone paying taxes. A shocking 90% of these projects suffer cost overruns. 90%! Rail projects come in, on average, 45% more expensive than projected, and highways are 20% more. Plus, the traffic forecasts, usually wildly inaccurate. So this isn't just an isolated oops, it's a systematic failure.
Let's move to Section 2, our case study on the Big Dig.
Now, the Big Dig is this fascinating paradox all on its own. If you look at it as a pure civil engineering concept, it was an absolute triumph. It took this incredibly ugly, congested, elevated freeway and replaced it with a beautiful, technically challenging set of underground tunnels and a stunning new signature bridge. And, it actually worked. It slashed traffic congestion and generated an estimated $177 million a year in time savings. But as a management exercise, it was an unmitigated disaster. We're talking defective concrete, thousands of leaks, a tragic tunnel ceiling collapse, and it left the state carrying a massive debt without the revenue to actually service it.
Just follow this jaw-dropping timeline of cost escalation. It's essentially the ultimate bait-and-switch, dragged out for almost 2 decades. In 1983, it was pitched at $2.2 billion. Okay, not too bad. By the time they started digging the airport tunnel portion in 1991, boom, $5.8 billion. By 1994, the official number was $7.8 billion, and by the time they finally wrapped it up in 2007, a colossal $14.8 billion. Seriously, how did the estimates get it so completely wrong for so long?
That brings us to Section 3, the anatomy of ambition. Let's dig a little deeper into the psychological and systemic why behind these massive financial disasters, because as it turns out, this isn't just about bad math. The crucial point is captured perfectly by researchers at MIT. The people proposing these projects, the politicians, the planners, the contractors, they are structurally incentivized to drastically underestimate the costs and the environmental impacts. Meanwhile, they're wildly overestimating the revenues. Why do they do it? Simple, to win approval and get the funding. If they showed the true terrifying cost up front, the project would literally never break ground. This brings us to what the World Bank calls the EGAP principle. EGIP stands for Everything Goes According to Plan. Actually, scratch that. It's more of a dangerous delusion than a principle. In these massive feasibility studies, risk is just disregarded. Planners assume the ground conditions will be perfect, there will be no labor strikes, no sudden inflation spikes, and definitely no costly design changes. But come on a multi-billion-dollar project that spans a decade, things never go perfectly according to plan. And honestly, no one should expect them to.
The real underlying issue here is a profound lack of accountability.
Political appointees usually have very short time horizons, maybe just a couple of years before an administration changes out. So because they just want to avoid short-term embarrassment, they tend to suppress the bad news. For example, during the Big Dig in 1994, managers actually knew the forecast was nearing $13.8 billion. But for PR purposes and to keep federal funding flowing, they applied a bunch of accounting tricks to artificially shrink the official estimate by $6 billion. By the time the truth finally comes out, the politicians who championed the whole thing have long since left office, and taxpayers are left holding the bag.
Okay, Section 4, Shifting Risk to Investors.
So how do we fix this? Research from the Reason Foundation brilliantly maps out a solution. They argue we need to move away from the traditional model, where the government, meaning you, bears all the risk, and shift towards the long-term concession model, which is actually pretty common in Europe and Australia. In this setup, a private consortium is hired to design, finance, build, operate, and maintain the project for, say, 30 to 50 years. The absolutely critical difference here: who pays for cost overruns? Under the traditional model, it's taxpayers. Under the concession model, it's the private investors. When you compare two similar urban tunnel projects built around the same time, the results are literally night and day. Boston's Big Dig used the traditional model and cost an astronomical $91 million per lane mile. But look at Melbourne, Australia. They built the CityLink project, a similar massive urban tunnel system dealing with terrible soil and all the headaches of existing city infrastructure. But Melbourne used the long-term concession model. The result? It was finished in a third of the time and cost just $27 million per lane mile. Because the private firm's spending was strictly capped by what future tolls could support, they had to stick to a firm budget. Transferring that risk to private capital enforces strict discipline and totally prevents project creep.
Section 5. Protecting the taxpayer. Now, we do have to address the elephant in the room here. What happens when these private, long-term concession projects fail? Because, as we've already established, megaprojects are inherently super risky. And there have been spectacular failures. The Channel Tunnel, connecting the UK and France, went 80% over budget and completely missed its traffic goals. Sydney's Cross-City Tunnel only saw a third of its forecast traffic and went totally bankrupt. But here's the kicker. Unlike the Big Dig, where taxpayers were on the hook for billions, the massive losses for the Channel and Sydney tunnels were eaten entirely by the investors. The private banks took huge financial haircuts, shareholders lost out, but the public got to keep the working, fully operational infrastructure without ever footing the bill for the failure. So, the real takeaway here is that by reforming how we set these projects up, by demanding they be backed by true private risk capital instead of a blank check sovereign guarantee, we instantly create built-in accountability. Think about it. If a private consortium knows they have to maintain a tunnel out of their own pocket for the next 50 years, you better believe they're going to focus on durable life cycle costs. They aren't going to cheap out on the initial construction. It places incredibly strict limits on capital spending and incentivizes builders to get it right the first time, managing costs with serious austerity. Mega projects are always going to capture our imagination. And honestly, as our infrastructure ages, we absolutely have to keep building them. But they shouldn't require a blank check from the public. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. The next time a politician stands at a podium and promises you a brand new, miraculously cheap highway or a shiny high-speed rail line, ask yourself this: when the shovels finally hit the dirt and the inevitable delays begin, whose money is really at risk? Yours or theirs? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.